Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today on the menu is going to be the En Passant capture, this very curious move in chess that confuses many, and a lot of people don't exactly know what is the story behind this weird move, why is it there and how it works. So in this video I'm going to attempt to uncover all the mysteries revolving around the En Passant capture. Let's start at the beginning. What on earth is the En Passant capture? This is what it looks like. When there is a pawn on the 5th rank for white or a 4th rank for black, but I will get to that in a minute, and the pawn is passing by pushing 2 squares ahead, white is actually allowed to capture that pawn as if that pawn only moved 1 square ahead. So pretending that it was only e6, I can take, or if you go e5, I can also take like so. And as you can see, the pawn is immediately disappearing from e5. Likewise, on the black side of the business, if I push this pawn down to the 4th rank and the white pawn is trying to pass by En Passant in passing, there is already a connection there that is going to help you to understand the meaning and the way how it works. So I can take it in passing as if it only moved to f3. Understanding the mechanism of the move is quite simple. The only thing that you need to note on top of the fact that this is a possibility, so anytime you try to pass by, you can get captured, but only on that particular move. So if I choose to not to take, I lose the right to take it any later. And it's only between pawn and pawn, so you cannot en passant any other pieces, of course. Now, why on earth does this thing exist, and why do we have to learn this weird rule of capturing a pawn like that? We would be so happy without it, you would think. The reason is actually quite complex, historical, and in my opinion, one that is worth knowing because it's a really fascinating story. So here it is. As you would know, chess comes from India, and it's an incredibly ancient game, at least 4,000–5,000 years old. And the history of the game is very complicated, and it reaches out in many directions that I really don't want to go into there too deeply. So just scratching the surface. From India, chess took many directions. One of them was down to Persia. From Persia, it entered the Arabic land, or the Arabic world, if you will. And actually, it was the Arabs, or the Moors, if you like, who brought chess into Europe, where it then really started to develop and flourish in the 14th, 15th, 16th, in particular the 16th century France. So it was the Moors, or the Arabs, who brought it into Europe during the first Moorish invasion of Spain in the very early 700s. Now, the reason why this is our key fact about the En Passant capture is because the game that the Arabs brought into Europe was dramatically different from how we know the game now in terms of the rules and how the pieces moved. And so I need to tell you right now that the game that entered Europe via the Arabic/Moorish invasion was vastly different. By the way, side note, at that time, the Arabic culture was actually superior to the European ones. And so not only did they bring in chess, but they brought a superior knowledge of astronomy, medicine, physics, chemistry, literature even. So it was actually, in many ways, a very beneficial historical event as far as culture is concerned for Europe, and chess indeed was part of the deal. But the rules were very different. The way how the Arabs played chess, the pieces moved differently. The pawns could move only 1 square ahead. This is going to be our key piece of information for this video. But you also need to be aware of the fact that other than the pawns that could only move a square at a time, the bishops could only go as far as 2 squares, and in fact they jumped to those squares, meaning that a bishop on c1 could not control b2 and d2, b2, but they could control the squares that I'm highlighting, and from e3 then they could jump to c5 or g5, so their movement was drastically limited. Likewise, the queen could only go 2 squares in any direction instead of the current all the way. Last but not least, they didn't have castles as part of the deal, so it took a lot longer to mobilize any army at all. So, long story short, it was a very slow game. As a reason of that, by the way, the Arabs started most of the times their chess games from so-called tabias, which is a word that we still use in current chess literature to describe a very well-known position that occurs after a very well-known opening. So, for example, in the Ruy Lopez, that's a Spanish dude, by the way, for good reason, we have got that name, because obviously that was also part of that history in the 1500s in that part of Europe. So here we go. This is a modern tabia starting position of the martial defense. We use that word up to date. It's a several hundred, in fact almost 1,000 years old word, perhaps a lot more, but it has been used for that many years. Now, back in the day, tabia actually meant that people started their game of chess from tabias. I will show you one that was used a lot in the Arabic world, and I'm actually going to get to that position via the Arabic moves so that you will appreciate why they opted to not to start their game from the starting position, because to get to this position would have taken them an eternity. Remember the bishop's jump? That was a very famous tabia. And they would start the game from here instead of the starting position, upon agreement with the opponent, of course. And then they would kick off from here, saving quite substantial amount of time and effort in order to play an actual game. Now, I don't exactly know when, and probably you need to talk to a chess historian about this, but the Europeans went like, this is just too slow for our liking. And alongside probably the Renaissance, when everything just started to really blossom and take off in Europe, especially in France, Italy, and in Western Europe, people went like, we need to accelerate this thing and make it faster. And they changed a heap of rules. And the way how we know chess now was mostly finalized, I think, in late 1700s or thereabouts. But the skeleton of the chess that we play now was already established in the 1500s. And one of the most important rule changes was that the pawn could move, instead of 1, 2 squares ahead, so that we could achieve or get to these tabias a lot faster than we used to be able to back in the Moorish/Arabic rules. But this created a situation that for a while people didn't quite think about. And that was that if you had a position where there were 2 pawns on neighboring files, and I'm going to set this up for you now just to model this perfectly well. Under Arabic rules, if these pawns started to move towards each other, inevitably there would be a point where they get to capture each other, which you could call a fair situation, right? If we are racing to one another, there should be a point where we can capture each other. However, upon introducing the new rule, the Europeans now face the situation where if I moved forward, then I moved forward again, and you passed me like so, we lost the opportunity to actually meet on the battlefield for a fight, and we just walked past each other. And for this reason, to avoid this situation that 2 pawns could literally just walk past one another without having to bat an eyelid, they introduced correctly this rule en passant, when in passing you actually get to take the pawn. And so that is the historical background of the en passant capture. I hope that you liked this little intro. Now I'm going to add a little bit more to it because I wanted to show you a couple of positions where very curious things can happen as a result of the en passant capture being available. This is one of them, and yeah, okay. So this position here on the board is one of my favorite checkmate in 2 problems that is revolving around the en passant capture. And there is a very curious phenomenon that I love about the en passant capture because it's so paradoxical, and that is that when you execute the move and the capture is possible, then 2 things disappear from the 4th rank. And so that is just a little bit of a trickery to the mind to actually visualize that correctly. so that when I play d4 and it gets captured, then the black pawn obviously disappears from e4 and goes to d3, and this just gets removed from the board. And so this puzzle is actually, is heavily focused on this really weird scenario, and actually the solution of the problem is pawn d4, which makes queen f2 checkmate virtually unstoppable. And you go like, whoa, whoa, hold on a tick. You just said en passant, right? But actually, en passant is illegal, because in that case, both pawns would disappear, exposing the black king to a check. And the reason why this composition is such a genius, because your mind, when I'm speaking this, still rebels against what I'm saying, because you go like, but when I take, it's already a discovered check here. But what we need to understand is that you cannot take. That pawn is virtually pinned. You can go e3 check, but you cannot go d3 check, because that would expose the black king to a check. I can prove it to you. I can't do this. The engine doesn't let me. It's illegal. And of course, e3 check is met by d5 counter check, just to justify the point of the problem too. But it's just amazing. I will actually show it to you on the edit board setup, where it looks a little bit clunky in the layout, but you will get me. So watch this. If I go here, if I were to take this, I would have to remove this 2 from the board, and that means that this guy is now in check. Yeah, I love this example. I will show you another one, which I really like. This is also a very famous checkmate in 3 chess problem, and the composition is based on, again, about the curious ways how en passant can happen. Look at this. The solution of this problem is e4, which introduces the dual mate threats of rook f5 and rook d5 in the opposite order than how I arrowed it. And so the pawn needs to be captured. Now it can be captured 2 ways. I can take it like so, whereupon the correct move is c4. And again, the mate threat is rook d5, and the only way to deal with this is to take like this. And curiously, now d4 is a checkmate. Note that, of course, there is no en passant possibility anymore, because for that the pawns would need to be here and here. Here we observe another interesting feature of the en passant, and that is that as I took on c3, I still blocked the queen's view towards d4, so that the pawn move on d4 still delivered a checkmate. Needless to say that there is another way to capture in the puzzle, and that is this way. When now you can I'm pretty sure you can figure out the rest of the solution. It's gonna be g4, offering black the en passant again, which is only, otherwise rook f5 is mate. And after f takes g3, we have got f4, checkmating the black king again in a really awesome fashion. So these were 2 en passant curiosities for you, and I hope that I managed to shed some light about how the en passant capture works, probably more importantly for most of you, why it is in chess, and I hopefully even provided some entertainment with these curious problems. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, to sub, to engage by commenting, and I shall be back with more videos soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.